Welcome back to War Thunder and welcome to the tank review on the Krupp-Steyr Waffenträger. This is a new vehicle in patch 1.71 and I can just sum it up in a nutshell. It has an awesome gun, but the vehicle itself is not very good. So that's the tank review. Oh, you want more? Okay, here we go. So, of course, I want to give you, in this time, a historical rundown, how it came to the concept of the Waffenträger, what the Germans had interest in the concept, and the main driving forces behind those decisions. Also, a bit of the forerunner, what initiated that idea. But then also want to talk about the stats of the vehicle, compare it to its major opponents on the battlefield, provide you with lots of gameplay, and also just show you the outstanding firepower of this vehicle for that BAR of 5.7. And then also give you tips and tricks how to make this vehicle work, because it's not that easy because of the lack of armor and lack of mobility. So, what are we talking here about? First of all, this is part of the German special open-top tank destroyer line, and together with the 88mm Flak 37 Selbstfallerfette auf 18 Tonnen Zugkraftwagen, to which I will come later on. In terms of the Zugkraftwagen, the Waffenträger is one of the few tanks with a fully rotatable turret, 360 degrees. It comes after the Nashorn at 5.3, which has basically the same gun. So the Waffenträger sits at 5.7, and that is one battle rating lower than the Tiger II Henschel. So yeah, you basically have the same gun. And a full battle rating lower. And everybody that knew how difficult it is to make the Nashorn work, but how you get rewarded, will be reminded in one way or another when playing the Waffenträger. So it really doesn't give the Germans anything new, but you know, it's just there to be researched and to be played. And yet again, I think this vehicle can have a great impact on the battlefield if you know how to play it. So, when we now go for the historical aspect of this tank, where does it come from? So, Germany always had nasty surprises in terms of their tanks when it comes to attack enemy countries. And, well, Poland had not too many tanks and too many good tanks to begin with, and they were relying on cavalry, and it was a real slaughterhouse. But it gave the Germans a first taste of battle, so they were kind of battle hardened in 1939. In 1940, Germany attacked France, and there is this is the place where the first incidents of German tanks getting repelled by superior Allied armor in the shape of Armour tanks, I guess they were called, but also Matilda tanks. So in many cases they had to retreat into German defensive positions that were covered with 88mm flak guns, such as we can see on this Zugkraftwagen. Now, the Zugkraftwagen combination with a flak cannon with a big caliber for that time, well, is kind of the first taste of what the Waffenträger is about. And yeah, so the Germans then thought about those incidences. They knew they need to make better tanks in terms of anti-tank capabilities, but also still keep the support for infantry, which was kind of still the backbone of any kind of attack. So the Germans built a lot of variations of the Panzer IV. The real anti-tank version of the Panzer IV is the F2, which players know and love, except if they're on a T-34 and they get shot. Sorry about this. But then the Germans were again reminded how actually inadequate their tanks were in anti-tank warfare when they attacked Russia, because they couldn't get enough of this attacking. But still the Germans had a huge success because of the combination of Air Force and use of many tanks in one place with good coordination, with experience and good communication against, in this case, then the Soviets with their KV-1 series of tanks and their T-34s. The tanks were superior in armor and to a certain degree also guns, because they still could pen easily the Germans if they were to hit them with which was not that easy with the bad optics. But then the Germans knew they couldn't sustain the losses. They couldn't just accept the losses. Russia, and to a certain degree also the Allied, could replace their losses. And so the Germans also didn't have the resources for a long war. Yes, they built impressive tanks for that time with the Tiger and the Tiger II and the Jagdtiger, which were just impenetrable forces on the battlefield, to a certain degree, of course. And the problem with them was they consumed a lot of fuel, which Germany lacked. They used a lot of steel, of which you could build many more tanks and many more guns with. And there were not many of them on the battlefield. They never had a real strategic impact on the warfare. And so Germany looked for big anti-tank guns that were self-propelled. So when Germany also had a lot of those PAKs, Panzerabwehrkanonen, but they were stationary. They were anti-tank guns, and they had to be towed, for example, with the Zugkraftwagen series of tanks. But they then again used resources. And as you can see, it's a very complicated vehicle. It's half-tracked, it has a stable platform, it has a rather complicated looking gun and a lot of crew. So this was more of a stopgap measure. In the long run, the Waffenträger series should replace them with the use of less steel, smaller engines, still very good guns that then could take over the role in the anti-tank warfare if needed. One surprising aspect is that the Nashorn features a PAK, Panzerabwehrkanone, for a tank destroyer. The Waffenträger is also a tank destroyer, but features a KWK-43 Kampfwagenkanone for a fighting vehicle. So it also should kind of take on the anti-tank role, but in a way where it doesn't get shot in the first place due to the long range. I guess that was intended. That's my best guess. Now, don't quote me on this, but this is where I expect the Germans to use these vehicles, because the Long 88 was notorious was infamous rather, for taking out Allied armor at extreme ranges, much like the 128mm later on. So yeah, there is that. Let's begin with the armor, and as we can see, there's not a lot of armor. 20mm, 10mm, 5mm. Yeah, this vehicle gets hull broken by calibers of over 76mm. So Russian 85s, I guess, are the smallest caliber then that hull breaks those vehicles. And even the American 76mm does great damage. So armor is nothing that you can really rely on. Also, you're open topped, and that is not great because you just have 4 crew members, of which the gunner and the loader are directly vulnerable to even machine gun fire. It doesn't even take rockets, which are still in dispatch highly effective against this kind of tank. There is transmission and the engine in the front, but they rarely will absorb the damage. So this is not a King Tiger transmission or Königstiger. And then we also have the commander and the driver in the front. And that is a bad thing because how the vehicle is made. You can see the vehicle has 8 degrees of gun depression and 45 degrees of gun elevation. That is not bad. Feels usable, especially after the Nashorn's 5 degrees of gun depression, which really lets you feel like one of those Russian tank destroyers. 8 degrees seems much more usable on the battlefield. But then we have, you know, this commander's and this driver's viewport, and you have then the Tiger H1 problem, which it has with those smoke launchers, because if you want to follow somebody with your gun, then you have those smoke launchers, and then your gun has to get up and traverse and then get down again. And we have the very same problem, just on a bigger scale, I guess, with those two, because it also reduces the forward firing angles to a certain degree before you have to elevate the gun. So most of the time I'm used to look downwards to have a better angle, camera angle, to spot enemies easier. and I'm also used to have the gun in around about this position from my vehicles in general. This is why I struggled with this vehicle so much in the first place. So armor isn't great, and then let's talk about the rest of the statistics. Let's begin where we talk about the mobility, and as you can see, it doesn't look very good, does it? We have the weakest engine on the lightest tank, and yet the horsepower to ton ratio is really not that great. 8.6. That is really bad. If you thought that the Nashorn is kind of clumsy, or the heavy tank number 6, the practically Japanese Tiger E, they have up to 42% more horsepower per ton ratio. That tells you a lot. So then there's also the top speed, which is just a little bit faster than the Centurion Mark 1 in this comparison, and also the reverse speed is not the best, so you cannot even reverse quickly, and the neutral steering is there, yes, but you have such a slow horsepower to ton ratio that it is not enjoyable to turn around. It's really tricky to bring this tank around the corner in conjunction with also the viewports to point your gun at something. It's really tricky. So especially when you're doing the stock grind, you feel like almost like a mouse. That is the feeling of this tank. You feel mobility wise like a mouse in a straight line. This tank actually is not all that bad. It can reach 20, 25, up to 30 kilometers an hour, but the second you turn, the second it goes uphill, the second you hit soft terrain, you're very slow. And then there is the gun. And as said before, the Waffenträger Krupp-Steyr, as it is actually in the right order of the name, features the 88mm KWK 43L71, which is for all intents and purposes more or less the same gun as on the Nashorn. And yes, it's called Nashorn, not Nashorn. It features just 30 rounds of ammunition, much as much as the ISU 122. However, that is more enough to deal with any kind of threat on the battlefield. The reload with 8.5 seconds is not the worst. You're beating the M36 GMC Slugger and also the ISU 122, but for much of surprise, but I was really surprised when it comes to the Nashorn, which has a 6.7 second reload, and also the heavy tank number 6 sitting kind of in the middle between them both with 7.4 for an ace crew. The turret rotation speed is also not the fastest, but you can make it work, and 14.0 degrees is faster than on a Nashorn, but well then slower than anybody else except the ISU 122 with just 7 degrees of traverse speed. Your gun depression is also -8 degrees as mentioned before, and that's okayish average kind of. And then you have 45 degrees of gun elevation, and that is kind of where this vehicle might have a sweet spot. Remember, you just have 4 degrees of gun elevation, which is better than the heavy tank number 6 with just 3 degrees, but slower than the M36 GMC Slugger. Why is that important? Because you have those 45 degrees of gun elevation. Now, you could look for shooting down an aircraft, which is always fun, but you should try to avoid to get spotted by an aircraft or to catch an aircraft's attention in the first place, which is very difficult, to be honest. And then you can position yourself on a down-facing ridgeline where you have some kind of cover so that you can still traverse your turret without interference of the viewports and have no problem at shooting at anything. That's at least the theory. The practice is not that easy. Then let's talk about the ammunition, and the first shell that I want to show you is the Panzergranate 39-43, which is an APCBC shell, aka an APHE shell, and this is practically the only shell that you should ever fire in this tank due to its vulnerability to anything else. You could switch to other ammunition types, but how useful they are has to be seen. We are talking here about a 10 kilogram warhead that travels at 1,000 meters per second, which is kind of unheard of to this state at that battle rating, just in APHE terms. APCR terms and the upcoming APDS rounds, especially from the British, are faster, no doubt about that, but for an APHE shell, that is very good. 108.8 grams of TNT equivalent will do the job at that battle rating, and with this patch I had the feeling that the shrapnels caused by the explosion after 80 centimeters of travel distance inside the tank are hot. They deal massive damage. The tanks will usually explode spectacularly in a spectacular fashion, will throw around their turrets, and yeah, it looks quite impressive. But then you have the fuse sensitivity of 28 millimeters, and that is a drawback because you do a lot of over penetration against your arch nemesis, which is the Hellcat. Remember, the armor is so weak you can penetrate it even by 50 cals. The Hellcat is very fast, very nimble, and it can shoot at you on the move with the 50 caliber and take out your gunner and your loader and even the commander and driver if needed, even from the front. So that's not very good, and you have the problems to get the gun on target. But if you hit and the fuse goes off, well, you can just destroy anything. And also 235 millimeters of penetration is nothing to complain about. So this is practically the definition of a glass cannon, or shall I say a glass killer cannon. This shell is whatever you need. Now, it makes no sense to take out any kind of ammunition, because if you have that great game at long range, you need all your 30 shots. The next shell is the second stock shell, which is the Sprenggranate, high explosive shell. It has 13 millimeters of penetration and 820 meters of muzzle velocity. That is nothing impressive, and again, there are not many targets that you can really take on with this shell, but maybe take one or two with you, or you are a really AAA god and you want to shoot down aircraft, then well, go for it. But I don't see any use for it. The third shell type is the Hochladungsgranate 39, which is a simple heat shell. 600 meters of muzzle velocity is not very high, and well, the penetration is also not that impressive. But with 110 millimeters you can go through lightly protected vehicles and maybe initiate hull break, which you might not be able to do with the 88 when hitting a Hellcat, for example. So it always depends, but it also might be just a better HE shell in terms of damage and damage dealing, but the muzzle velocity is lower. However, you have to research this tier 2 upgrade to be able to initiate the consecutive research on the next shell. The fourth and last shell type is a tier 4 upgrade, and it's the Panzergranate 4043, and it's an APCR shell. And it has an impressive muzzle velocity of 1200 meters per second for that tier. It also features 272 millimeters of penetration, but that is actually too much. I'm not talking about over penetration, which just applies to HE shells with the high fuse sensitivity. I'm talking here about you are very bad against sloped armor, where the APHE shell is actually a little bit better, or retains more of the penetration, is more reliable, doesn't bounce that often, and you also do not a lot of damage with this shell. And I can't think of any tank at that battle rating that could withstand the long 88. Maybe in a complete up tier to 6.7, then you have to get into the mindset of a King Tiger in terms, or Königstiger, Tiger 2 in terms of how to use the gun against which enemy. So here I have prepared a little stat card comparison for you between the different weapon systems, and we can see how outstanding the APHE shell is in terms of penetration. And keep in mind also, the only tank that comes close is the ISU 122 with a battle rate, with the same battle rating, but a 122mm gun that needs 20 seconds to reload with a slower muzzle velocity difficult to aim, and also poor mobility in comparison to everything else at the battle rating. So after all these stats, you might ask yourself the question, how do I use this tank? So first of all, this tank is not an assault tank. It's not a Ferdinand. It's far from it. It's also not a Hellcat because it lacks the, well, mobility. It also cannot really react that well to close quarters threats, except if those close quarter threats don't know that they are a threat to you, aka they don't know you're there. So in this match here on Eastern Europe, I have a very unique position that I just made use of, and I will just simply talk you through. You don't have that great mobility. In this gameplay it doesn't really look that bad because it's flat and it's hard terrain. You know, it's a concrete ground, I guess, something like that. It's basically a street. And this is the best that you will see with this tank. And I'm driving in a straight line. I almost can keep up with the Tiger too, but that's kind of deceiving, okay? Trust me on that. And this tank is fully upgraded. Now this Tiger 1 does a good job here of securing my flank, so I can snipe. So this is what this tank is made: to ambush the enemy, to snipe at mid to long range, to give them no chance, to just kill them with one shot, and to give your team a bit more time in going for the objective. So this is one of the main criticisms that I have, that with this patch we saw no light tanks or no real mobile tanks for the Germans. And here is our first customer, T-3485, shot in the side of the turret, and he blows up completely. Ammo rack. So this is what I'm talking about with the 1.71 88mm performance. It just obliterates every enemy in a spectacular fashion with one shot. As this T-25 also felt. Yes, those are now side shots, and you can do this with a lot of tanks, I agree. But you have to be patient with this tank, and you have to continue doing this and make sure your first shot hits and kills the enemy. The gun certainly has the capabilities, and those were the 3 quick kills that I needed for my income in the match, and for also giving my team the time to engage the enemy team without the capture zone bleeding out our tickets. Those are the important things that I wanted to show you with this battle. And also I wanted to show you the drawback of the mobility and the playstyle with it. Because if the battle moves on, when it's now the so-called cleaning up stage, you cannot really participate in hunting down the enemy tanks. The battle or the front line is moving away from you faster than you can catch up if you miss the point of going with the battle. Also without exposing yourself to that one tank that slips through. Very often I had 4 kill matches and I was just about to get an ace, but I was then just getting too greedy, and yeah. The one thing that I also wanted to highlight here is I'd rather go for the securing of the objective in terms of kind of long range defending it from anybody that wants to slip into the capture zone when it happens, for example, which can happen, that the front line buckles and breaks and now the enemy team is coming with a few tanks. I also have to prioritize the biggest threat and neutralize it. So if, for example, my Tiger 1 has to deal with the Centurion 1 and a T-3485, I want to shoot the Centurion Mark 1 because I can penetrate it more reliable than the Tiger. But the Tiger can usually deal with the T-3485. But it also is very situational. This is just a theoretical example. Also, you want to use your side of the engine, so you want to reverse around corners, because if somebody is shooting you with a not very big caliber, he doesn't immobilize you. Because remember, the engine, the transmission, and also the driver sit in the front of the vehicle. The only thing in the back of the vehicle are the fuel tanks, so you might get set on fire by low caliber rounds, so under 85 millimeters. At least that's the threshold for hull break that I noticed. So, and that's practically the battle. And without further ado, I call it here and say that's the tank review for the Krupp-Steyr Waffenträger. It brings nothing new to the German tech tree, because we have the Long 88 with a faster reload on a lower battle rating vehicle already. Granted, it has no turret, but it's already there. So it's not really firepower wise a real, what should I call it, power creep. But then again, it neglects armor. But then it suffers for it by having not a lot of armor, being very vulnerable to aircraft when they notice you. And yeah, you're also very vulnerable to flanking. You cannot keep up with the battle when the battle is fast moving. You also cannot retreat in time if your front line is collapsing, or the front line of your team. So it's a very situational vehicle. When it comes to the performance of the gun, the vehicle will serve you, or rather the gun will serve you very well at this battle rating. There is nothing that I really have to complain about. And when it comes to the performance of the tank very often will let you down. That's the basic message. You need to be patient, you need to go for ambush positions, you need to read the map, where to position yourself in advance, in cover, stay hidden, and yeah, you must also rely on your team. Because if you get engaged by multiple tanks, you can't really deal with them. Except if they are oblivious and, well, do not pay attention if you're right next to them. So the last example here is then about the fragility of the vehicle again, and the vulnerability to very low tier vehicles. I just let the video run in the background, and I thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and please consider to give this video a like if you did. I would really appreciate it. Let me know in the comment section what you think about this vehicle. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see each other on the battlefields and in the skies of War Thunder.